Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Barlo Dermagradishan of the Armenian Studies program at Fresno State. Welcome to this evening's presentation, which is going to be by Dr. Suren Manukin on the topic of Bureaucrats of the Armenian Genocide, the Mid-Level Perpetrators. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to give you some information about some of our upcoming events in the month of October, and I'm going to share a brief PowerPoint with you so that you can see some of the upcoming events of the Armenian Studies program. Next week, on Thursday, October the 21st, we will have a lecture by Suren Manukin, who is going to talk about lessons from Nakhichevan assessing the threat to heritage. He is a Denver-based political scientist and a human rights advocate, and he's been doing research on the question of the cultural threat to the heritage of Nagorno-Karabakh. That will take place at 7 p.m. on Thursday, October the 21st. It will be a Zoom webinar, so please take a look at the link at the bottom of the page. Then on Saturday, October the 30th at 10 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Umit Kurt will be speaking on the Armenians of Aintab, the economics of genocide in an Ottoman province. And that's also the title of his newly published book, which has just come out through Harvard University Press. And Dr. Umit Kurt is a Polonsky Fellow at the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem. And his presentation will be, again, a Zoom webinar at 10 o'clock on Saturday, October the 30th. And then Dr. Suren Manukin will give the third and final presentation in his three-part series called Ordinary Killers of the Armenian Genocide, the Lower Level Perpetrators, which will take place on Friday, November the 12th at 7 p.m., also on the Armenian Studies web and Zoom webinars. These can be watched also on YouTube. Tonight, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Suren Manukin. He is currently the Kazan visiting professor in Armenian Studies at Fresno State for the fall 2001 semester. He is also the head of the UNESCO Chair on the Prevention of Genocide and Other Atrocity Crimes at Yerevan State University, and also head of the Department of Comparative Genocide Studies at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan. In his first presentation of this three-part series, Dr. Manukin discussed the architects of the Armenian Genocide, the top-level perpetrators. This evening, he will discuss the bureaucrats of the Armenian Genocide, the mid-level perpetrators, where he will discuss the second level of genocide perpetrators who were directly involved in regulating the genocide following the directives of top authorities. And he will outline the structures or the state bureaucracy on this level. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Suren Manukin. Dr. Manukin, welcome.
Thank you, Barlo, for having me today as lecture of today's evening. And yes, we started last week with the decision makers, and here you can see I've shared my screen, and you can see this structure of genocidal society, the structure of perpetrators of genocide. And in each genocide, we have similar, let's say, construction. And in our last lecture, we talked about decision makers. Decision makers are the top of this hierarchy, and they are involving in organization of all this process and supervision of this process of genocide. They formulate ideology. They create some legal basis for genocide by adopting laws, by sending orders and directives to provinces, by organization of all this mechanism of implementation of genocide. But at the same time, we should remember that genocide is not possible without so-called second level of perpetrator of genocide, and they are local officials or party secretaries who encompass structures which are directly involved in regulating the genocide, following the directives of top authorities and ensuring the implementation of these instructions. And the role of the structures or the state and party bureaucracy is prominent. And let me bring some examples. Many genocide scholars stress on this importance, on this pivotal role of bureaucracy in implementation of genocide, in perpetration of genocide. For example, Jack Porter, one of the early, let's say, genocide scholars, he gave this special role to those structures in describing genocide, and he states that perpetration of genocide requires that there are three major components in place: the ideology, the technology, and the bureaucracy. Another scholar, sociologist Irving Horowitz, again one of the founding fathers of genocide studies, describes genocide as structural and systematic destruction of innocent people by a state bureaucratic apparatus. Here again, we can see how important bureaucracy, how important is the role of bureaucracy in this process, in the process of genocide. And the last quote from Christopher Browning. Christopher Browning, another scholar who is well known by his book Ordinary Men, published in 1992, and this book fundamentally changed our comprehension of perpetrators of genocide. He argues that the Nazi mass murder of the European Jewry was not only the technological achievement of industrial society, but also the organizational achievement of a bureaucratic society. So here we see that what is in common in all these three quotes or citations, they are stress the focus on the central role of bureaucracy, central role of bureaucrats, officials of mid-level in the structure of genocidal society. The local bureaucracy would greatly precondition the nature and the intensity of genocide. And local elites could intensify or slow down the dynamics of killing. And it is very visible if we look at the map of Armenian genocide, the map of the implementation of genocide in the time of First World War. You can see that the magnitude of killing, the rate of killing varies, and here we can find some correlation with this or that provincial elite, provincial leadership. And the coordination of Armenian massacres in the provinces of the country of the Ottoman Empire was entrusted to Valis, and we will start our presentation with the Valis, the governors of the provinces of Ottoman Empire, most of whom were actively agitating for and arranging the deportations and killings. Here in this slide, you can see two of them. Cevdet, who was Vali of Van, and in the time of Van resistance, self-defense, and Cemal Azmi, another Vali, another governor of Trebizond. I also brought photos of another two Vali's governors, Abdulhalik Renda, who was Vali of Bitlis in 1915, and later he was appointed as governor of Aleppo in 1916. Aleppo was very central, very important for implementation of genocide, because these Armenian caravans of Armenian deportees en route to Deir Zor just passed through the province of Aleppo. And Mehmed Rashid, who was the governor of Diyarbakir province, so-called Bachur Valley. So these people were actively involved in implementation of genocide, in arranging the deportations, arranging the killings, and expropriation of Armenian property. And that was reasonable, since most of the governors were loyal to the Union and Progress Party, to the Young Turkish Party. Oftentimes, Talat's the brothers in arms. For example, Cevdet, the Vali of Van, personally led the process of execution and spared no effort to implement the plan to the best of his capacity. And Cemal Azmi was famous with his cruelty. In Morgenthau, in his memoirs, told about nightly discussions at the headquarters of the Union and Progress Committee about torture technique. Each new method of inflicting pain was hailed as a splendid discovery, and the regular attendants were constantly ransacking their brains in the effort to devise some new torment. They even delved into the records of the Spanish Inquisition and other historical institutions of torture, and adopted all the suggestions found there. And Cemal Azmi was champion in proposing the methods of torture. Or another one, the Vali of Diyarbakir, Mehmed Rashid, is on the left. He was one of the founders of the Young Turkish Party. He deported and exterminated hundreds of thousands of Armenians, demonstrating an outstanding zest. For example, Arab witness Faisal Hussein mentioned that as of August 1915, some 570,000 Armenians were exterminated in Diyarbakir. And the crimes committed on the territory of the province ruled by Rashid are hard to describe. Victims were crucified, they were horseshoed, stamped by hot horseshoes, their skulls smashed to pieces, and an example of Rashid's ferocity is provided by the correspondent of the British newspaper Morning Star, according to whom Dr. Rashid took 500 children, enclosed them in a building, and set light to eat. The scale of his cruelty made the Germany consul to Mosul, Holstein, demand that German ambassador von Wangenheim interfered and required the Ottoman government to restrain Rashid. and he was indeed ousted. But however, the reason was rather the expropriation of the Armenian property, and he stole Armenian property without sending something to the Constantinople, and in exchange with another very important quote from him, in an exchange with the General Secretary of Ittihad, of the Young Turkish Party, Midat Shukru, that happened in the period following the war. Dr. Reshid tried to justify the annihilation of Armenians by the sense of duty he felt both as Turk and as doctor, just like describing Armenians like dangerous microbes. So, okay, being a doctor could not cause me to forget my nationality. Reshid is a doctor, but he was born as a Turk. On the occasion how I, as doctor, could have murdered, I can answer as follows. The Armenians had become hazardous microbes in the body of this country. Well, isn't it a doctor's duty to kill microbes? Yes, and by the way, this medical terminology was widespread in the speeches, in the vocabulary of young Turks, because many of them were doctors, and they used this medical terminology to dehumanize Armenian population of Ottoman Empire, calling them diseases, calling them cancer, calling them tumors in the body of the Ottoman Empire. So valleys were very instrumental and very central in this middle level group of perpetrators of Armenian genocide, because again they ruled these provinces and they could organize and supervise and monitor and observe the course of implementation of the genocide. Besides the valleys, the process engaged heads of smaller regions, the mutasarrifs, the prefects, the heads of some regions, regional level, as well as local police, heads of gendarmerie, and religious leaders, and of course members of Ottoman Parliament. For example, he was Prom Hoja Ilyas Sami in Bitlis, or Mehmet Nuri Bey in Kharber, and others. They were actively involved in the killings of Armenians across the country, and party representatives were eagerly included in the Armenian genocide along the local officials. And because the Committee of Union on Progress, Young Turk, they had a well-tuned network of party structures in the villages, in the regions. And in 1908, shortly after the revolution, they formed clubs in the regions which were the real centers of power in the provinces, directly following party decisions. And the clubs were also expected to disseminate anti-Armenian hate speech. Here I brought an example. Russian consul in Erzurum, Adamov, reported in January 1914, Armenians expect assault anytime, despite the Armenian resent, which was caused by the Ittihadist under emissary Hilmi Bey arriving from the capital. The Ittihadist club, which was chaired by the Germany envoy, had organized a shooting contest in distant districts of the country. The majority of the local mob and dadashes, which are just gangs local gangs equipped with arms were there. Armenians are sure of the prepared assault, while the Dadashis openly say the massacres is simply postponed. And the local elites, including the Valis, were all members of Ittihadist clubs and therefore entertained tremendous influence. Vice Consul of Germany to Erzurum, von Schubner-Richter, reported on July 28, 1915, that the parallel of authority operated in the state. He underlined the severity of conditions in which the deportation were carried out by a group Ittihadists. In an instance when the governor had agreed to stop deportation of families of health-crippled people, absent men, and lonely women, the local Young Turks club had interfered and had downplayed the decision. The undescribable cruelty that followed led to the death of the people. So these clubs usually had even more influence and more authority in provinces than even governors. And yes, okay, governors were part of these clubs, but these clubs had decisive, let's say, voice in many issues. And as I thought, in some provinces, some governors tried to slow down the process of deportation, but after the interference of representatives of local clubs, their decisions were downplayed. And these clubs, young Turkish clubs in provinces, were integrated into party branches in vilayets, which were operating under the party's central committee, and in 1913, another important decision was made. Another important step to the Armenian Genocide was implemented. The Central Committee of Young Turk Party delegated party officials to regions. The delegates comprised executive secretaries of the Party of Union and Progress, emissaries of party, and superintendents of party, which played an essential role in carrying out the Armenian Genocide. They were carefully selected and appointed by the Central Committee of Party, and were mostly former army officers. In this photo, you can see one of the meetings with the participation of executive secretaries. And these loyal party members could provide efficiently in the organization and guidance on the local level to ensure the smooth and accurate implementation of the plan. As a matter of fact, they were the party agents licensed for total control and a purpose to ensure the proper process of the genocide. They were needed, who could be trusted, who were committed enough to execute orders from above without relenting or hesitation, and above all, who are efficient. Nowhere in the entire this entire macabre drama of the genocide under review is the organizational makeup of the monolithic political party seen providing itself so crucial for swift task performance as in the roles that the Ittihad party assigned to these provincial commissars who served as the party's omnipotent controlling agents. This And these party activists were a link between the central committee of Ittihad and the grassroots conveying the orders down from the center, and the encrypted directives of the Ministry of Interior were reaching the local authorities and structures, the governors, regional security officers of the ministers, as well as the gendarmerie through these executive secretaries. And these secretaries would create groups of 4 to 6 to support them, head the local party structures, organize meetings, and set the local population against Armenians, issue orders on deportations, massacres, and lootings. In some instances, they would personally lead the process of killing. The executive secretaries were also involved in forming special organization, Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa detachments, and directing mob groups. Executive secretaries were given tremendous power, and they could even issue directives to valis and mutasarrifs. For example, as I mentioned before, they could change the policy of the region. And one of them, for example, Nail, the executive secretary of Trabzon, overturned the local vali's decision according to which children and handicapped people could temporarily avoid deportation. In other provinces, in Angora, in Yozgat, in Aleppo, and Kastamonu, or in Konya, where the deportations were carried out with a certain degree of reluctance, the valis were ousted by the Ittihadist officials, punished in some cases, and replaced with more enthusiastic officials. And all this duty was under supervision of executive secretaries. And in the course of 1919 and 1920, tribunals organized in the post-war period, the cases of the executive secretaries were heard in separate sessions, which proved the importance of the roles they played. And these party structures and executive secretaries had worked with the governor, mutasarrif, and gendarmerie office directly, and these local elite groups, which were comprising of about 30 to 40 people and were usually involved in genocidal operations, included also heads of renewed families, Kurdish and Turkish tribe chiefs, as well as local administrations, law enforcement bodies, religious leaders, and party activists. And it's very interesting that the competition frequently evolving inside those groups to prove group members' loyalty to the leaders of Ittihad in anticipation of privileges in the future. So even these local organizers of Armenian genocide, either these middle-level structures were in competition, trying to show their loyalty and their efficiency in the implementation of Armenian genocide. In Diyarbakir, for instance, the race ended up with victory of three families, Perichizadeh, Muftizadeh, and Darabekzadeh families. And this party notables' role also was very interesting. In most cases, these men, these influential families, influential Turkish, Kurdish families, influential in regions, they were themselves the members of local Young Turk committees, Young Turk councils, and in some regions, because of their connections they were even far too strong for governors to oppose, and their power is in some regions were sometimes almost absolute. A man who opposes them will be thrown into prison or even killed. And another important figures in this local level, they were these religious leaders or clerics, and the religious leaders comprising the theocratic strata of the Ottoman social system, and they were agents of some social control. And in this sense, they were also authority figures beyond the compass of their social influence. One way or another, they had to certify that the massacres against the Armenians in given situations were in accord with the Sharia, the canon law of Islam. And notable among this class of religious influential were the muftis, the so-called jurist council, serving as Muslim jurists and senior religious authorities, dispensing formal legal opinion, a kind of Supreme Court justice, and qadis, as Muslim judges who, as guardians of law and order, as magistrates, represented by far the most important category in the Turkish system. And in the domain of education, there were the ulemas, doctors of Muslim theology, a powerful vested interest group that steadily fought against secularization, modernization, and infidels. And the opportunities that were given to these infidels, to Christians by the new constitutions. They were included in this fabric of the Ottoman theocracy. And these men of religion, with very few exceptions, play a pivotal role in motivating and legitimizing the massacres. It is generally accepted that the planners of the Armenian genocide were neither inspired by Islam nor motivated by religion intolerance. But this is by no means decisive. In practice, they actively they activated social forces by the policies they pursued, including the proclamation of jihad at the beginning of First World War, to mobilize religious fanaticism in the population of the empire. And furthermore, the motivation of the CUP leaders was shaped not only by their political philosophy, but also at the deep and unconscious level by the intangible influence of conditioning in the culture milieu. This became an effective instrument for genocide. Even during the Adana massacres in 1909, for example, Muslim clerics issued a fatwa that confirmed that Islam accepted the killing of Christians and urged the crowd to participate in it. And after the proclamation of jihad on November 14, 1914, the killing of Armenians bore legitimacy in religious terms. In many areas, clerics, in this photo, you can see the process of proclamation of jihad on November 1914. Of course, this jihad was proclaimed against the foreign enemies of the Ottoman regime, against Britain, Russia, and France. But for ordinary Muslim living somewhere in remote province of Ottoman Empire, it was something strange, and because he never seen British, Russian, or French men in his life, but at the same time he had Armenians, Greeks, or Assyrians living nearby, living as their neighbors. And that's why this proclamation of jihad became very, very instrumental, very, very effective for the mobilization of masses into the process of genocide. And so after the proclamation of genocide, the killing of Armenians bore legitimacy in religious terms. And in many areas, these clerics even led the columns of Muslims and blessed them for punishment, the unbelievers. It activated the traditional springs of religious fanaticism, and the mosques played a signal role in the mobilization of the faithful through a variety of techniques of incitement. The most frightful episodes of carnage often coincided with Friday religious services, immediately following which the assaults were unleashed. We find many additional evidences in reports of German, Austrian embassies, diplomats working in the Ottoman Empire at that time. Then how these religious figures they participated in. Firstly, in the process, they suggested conversion to the Muslim faith, but when Armenians refused, they ordered them to be killed one by one, usually on the threshold of Armenian churches, and they justified and explained the process as something that is according to the Islamic law, and they did it with the specific even religious rituals. Yes, this is a very interesting photo of the extermination of Armenians from Zeytun. They were brought to Marash, and here you can see Armenians on the lower level, and Turkish local elite standing on the top of this picture. And here you can see Vali, you can see military governor, you can see religious and civil leaders, let's say authorities in this local authorities in this photo. Another important group in this middle level perpetration was military and paramilitary structures, and genocides are mostly carried out by means of military and paramilitary structures. In some cases, those are already existing one, while others, new structures are specifically formed for the perpetration of genocidal acts. And the people of Gendarmerie and under the Ottoman Ministry of Interior were directly involved in the perpetration of the Armenian genocide by participation in the massacres and the seizing on the confiscated Armenian property. The police would circle the Armenian settlements, break into the houses of the Armenian population, pretending to toss for arms. Detained Armenian men forcibly deported the Armenian population, and the death marches were usually guarded by the Gendarmerie, and they would urge on the deported, depriving them of rest, expropriate their jewelry and clothes, prohibit the people from drinking when passing by water sources and wells, depriving them of food, torturing them, raping, crippling, and killing them. And the ministries of Interior and War also supervised the telegraph and the railroad networks, the main means of communication of the empire. And the telegraph machines played a crucial role in organizing Armenian deportations and mass killings. Those were used to send directives and reports to the local administrations and party representatives. Talat had once been a postal officer and had a telegraphing machine of its own, which he used to send orders from his home. And numerous Armenians who used to work at postal services were laid off in mass from early 1915, because these institutions, postal institutions, became very, very decisive in the implementation, this process of implementation of Armenian genocide. So for Armenian genocide, this telegraph machines is equal as, for example, radio in Rwandan genocide, and they could be identified as the killing machine in the time of genocide. So it is another parallel with the modernity, with the development of modern technology and implementation of genocide. The Turkish army too had a part in the perpetration of the Armenian genocide, and particularly big role has been played by the commander-in-chief of the army, Minister of War Enver Pasha, commander of 4th Army Cemal, the commander of 3rd Army Mahmud Kamil, generals Halil Kut, Enver's uncle, and Ali Ihsan Sabis actively participated in the Armenian genocide as well. And to remind, under the law of deportations, the observance of the provincial law was licensed to the Ministry of Defense, and army's involvement was greatly conditioned by Enver's factor. The disarming and extermination of the Armenian soldiers of Ottoman Empire was motivated by Enver crushing defeat in the Battle of Sarigamish, and Armenians have been openly declared as enemies on the state soon after, and hundreds of thousands of Armenian soldiers and officers serving in the Ottoman army were exterminated in February-March 1915 in the first days of Armenian genocide, in the first stages of Armenian genocide. Here you can see some Armenian officers just in the first days of First World War, and in this photo you can see Armenian soldiers already transferred to these labor battalions. So hundreds of thousands of Armenians were transferred to these battalions. And as Henry Morgenthau wrote, in the early part of 1915, the Armenian soldiers in the Turkish army were reduced to a new status. Up to that time, most of them had been combatants, but now they were all stripped of their arms and transformed into workmen. Instead of serving their country as artillerymen and cavalrymen, these former soldiers were discovered that they had been transformed into road laborers and pack animals. In many instances, Armenian soldiers were deposed of even more summarily fashion, for it now became almost the general practice to shoot them till cold blood. So army units were actively involved in where Armenians would organize self-defense, and there was a need to bear down the resistance. And for example, the attempt to crack down resistance in Van and Musadah involved army units. And furthermore, the influence the military had on the Turkish elites largely facilitated to presenting the activities as a military need. In 1919, the Turkish authorities detained a number of high-ranking military officers after the change of power in Turkey. They detained a number of high-ranking military officers, calling the latter organizers of the Armenian genocide in the areas under their control. It corresponded to the truth to the certain extent. For example, von Schöbner-Richter, who was the vice consul of Germany in Erzurum, complained to the Vali of Erzurum, Tahsin, of the violence against deported population, and Tahsin promised to stop them, while at the same time made an attempt to justify himself by explaining it with the real power in the region was centralized in the hands of commander of 3rd Army Mahmud Kamil. Since the genocide of the Armenians were carried out on war-torn territories of the empire, and since there was a situation of martial law, the military had concentrated the political power in their regions in their hands. And Vagan Dadarian, in his research on the Kayseri region in Caesarea region, brings this case of the Caesarea region, where the army would take care of the military conscription, logistics, and transportations, as would perform additional functions, that is unproportionate confiscation of different levels, as well as justices made by military tribunals, both of which had tragic consequences for the Armenian population. Furthermore, the army commanders relied on the units of the gendarmerie, which accompanied numerous groups of deported Armenians. And the last thing, the Ottoman bureaucracy also organized micromanaging of the expropriation of the Armenian of the remaining Armenian property in the depopulated settlements to the Muslims. And yes, at the same time, this regional leaders, local leaders, and also regional commanders, they also supervise the process of usage of non-regular forces to carry out the dirty job in the Armenian genocide. They organize these groups of people. They forced them to participate in mass killings. They encouraged them, and they promised impunity. And we will discuss this low-level perpetration, of course, in our next presentation, and the decisive role of Teşkilat-ı Mahsuse, the special organization which was created by the young Turkish leaders. But now, just to conclude and to sum up what we discussed today. So in the middle level, in the meso level of perpetration of Armenian genocide, we had these party secretaries, the executive secretaries of the Young Turkish Party, who supervised the process of the implementation of Armenian genocide, who had even in some places more power than governors of this province, and who were this very important, let's say, hub for concentration of information and for being the providers of information from the top to the grassroots. These faceless bureaucrats who made implementation of top initiatives possible. The next group were valis, or governors of this province, people who had this executive power in their hands and who were appointed to rule everyday life in the provinces of Ottoman Empire. Another group in this mid-level were religious leaders, clerics, who gave religious legitimacy to the process of extermination, and who provided the mobilization of masses into a killing process, and army, military leaders, because it was time of war, because many military units were stationed in the territory of Western Armenia, and these military commanders of armies, gendarmerie, police, or all these structures had another pivotal role in the implementation of Armenian genocide. And of course, some regional authorities, people with influence in regions, influential families, tribe chiefs. For example, if we look at the case of Bitlis, just why Bitlis? Just because Bitlis was in the center of this deportation process, and the entire political, administrative, military, and local governmental hierarchy was mobilized to perpetrate this violence. The executioners in the front ranks were to be found, of course, within the leadership of local CUP club. Also, parliamentary deputies were involved in this circle. Among the civilian officers who played important role, of course, was this Vali of Bitlis, Abdul Halik Renda, were also Hamdi Effendi, who was the president of municipality. Also, they were responsible for expropriation of Armenian property. Among also commander-in-chief of the squadrons of special organization, a police chief of Bitlis, Turfan Bey, who organized the arrest of the execution of our Armenian noblemen. The police Captain Ahmed Refik, who was also very prominent in this process of arrest of Armenian population, heads of gendarmerie in the Bitlis region, with this essential Kurdish population, tribal chiefsmen and local clans played a direct role in the massacres, and some influential Muslim families. And the last thing, surely the last thing for this presentation, what was the fate of this, the destiny of these mid-level perpetrators during so-called War of Liberation, when Kemalist forces took power in the Ottoman Empire? In essence, a continuation, the state formation process. They were included in the new formed bureaucracy of Kemalist states, and Kemalists they assumed control of the local elites who had collaborated in CUP crimes, and and they were incorporated in the system of Kemalist states, and many of them became prominent officials in the time of Ottoman Empire. The same Abdul Halik Renda became even a head of the parliament of Turkish Republic. So if in the case of main organizers of Armenian genocide, we had these acts of vengeance, of retribution, we have Operation Nemesis, the most of the mid-level perpetrators remained unpunished, and they became the part of newly created Turkish Republic, and it was a very important thing to stress on the continuation of the bureaucracy of Ottoman Empire from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic. So that's all with my presentation. If you have questions, please, I will be happy to share my ideas and thoughts and opinions about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manukyan, for that very interesting overview of the bureaucrats of the Armenian Genocide. I would ask our audience if they would like to ask questions to please use the chat function in Zoom. And while they're doing that, I'm going to ask the first question, Dr. Manukyan, because it's very interesting. I think the case of the valis, or the governors of these regions. And my question is, can you give an example of any vali or governor that actually didn't want to go along with the orders for the genocide, and what were the consequences of that resistance or that disobedience?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's very important to stress that on the different, let's say, attitude to this policy, because we had, as I mentioned, we had this correlation of the attitude of valis and the rate and the intensity of the deportations in different regions. In some regions, or in some provinces, in some sub-regions, in Sanjaks, for example, where some rulers were more, let's say, tolerant to the existence of Armenians, the scale of violence was not so high. And for example, I wanted to mention one of them. It was the governor it was Mehmet Celal Bey. He was governor of many provinces, and in the time of Armenian genocide, he was governor of Konya. And it's interesting that he tried to save Armenians. He tried to stop deportations, and each time he was when he went to Constantinople with his administrative duties, the deportation started in the province. After his return, he tried to stop deportation. And we have another examples, not only this Mehmet Celal's case, but also other valis and other heads of sanjaks who tried to stop deportations. Of course, they had there were different penalties against them. Some of them were dismissed. Some of them even were killed. In the case of Celal, he was lucky, and partly because he was a member of Sultan's family. And that's why, being of this, having these connections, let's say bloody connections, well, connections with the ruler of Ottoman Empire, the formal ruler of Ottoman Empire, he was not killed. Another important figure I wanted to mention was the Vali of Ankara, who Hasan Mazhar, who was Mazhar, was famous because he became the head of the court, the tribunals which were organized after the First World War to bring the criminals of Armenian genocide to court. And he was the governor of Angora or Ankara in the time of Armenian genocide. yes, we should remember these people, and at the same time, we should remember that their deeds were not motivated only by their attitude to Armenians. It was a very, very let's say sophisticated reasons for their reluctance to enthusiastically organize the deportation of Armenians. Some of them had their political reasons. Some of them were in opposition with a regime. Some of them had, for example, a prominent non-Muslim population in their regions, and they understood that the destruction of Armenians, destruction of Greeks and Assyrians could bring to disaster in this province. They could not organize the let's say food of this province. They could not organize the functioning of these provinces, and that's why they acted this or that way. So it was not just motivated by their good, let's say, attitude to Armenians, but yes, it's very interesting process, and I think it needs to be researched to see these differences in different provinces, in various provinces of Ottoman Empire.
Thank you. Now I have another question for you. Could you expand on the primary sources you relied on for the information? So where did you specifically go to find the information on these mid-level governors and on the officials that you were discussing?
The prime source for this, let's say, micromanagement of the Armenian genocide is the memoirs of perpetrators, memoirs of people who were involved in the process of extermination of Armenian population of Ottoman Empire. And last years in Turkey, many memoirs of the Turkish officials who were in their young years members of CUP and participated in this or in some level in Armenian genocide are published, and they are the rich source for understanding the inner process within the party, the inner process within this system, this bureaucracy, this mechanism, and this interconnected let's say ties within this network. But of course, we have some problems with these sources, because usually they are subjective, because they are written by the people who directly were involved in this process. But at the same time, we can find very useful and very interesting details. At the same time, of course, they are some another corpus of material on this topic is reports of German and Austrian diplomats working in Ottoman Empire, because they identified German officials as their allies, and sometimes they even didn't conceal their deeds, their plans, and in reports sent from the provinces of Ottoman Empire to Constantinople's embassy, German embassy, or to Berlin, we can find a lot of interesting details. And of course, the last source, and I want to stress this source specifically, these are Armenian sources. Unfortunately, Armenian sources were neglected for decades. Of course, they were objective reasons and for this, because we tried to. These sources were considered as unreliable by some denialists, and in this course of struggle against denial of Armenian genocide, even many Armenian scholars tried to avoid, or they were not prone to use Armenian sources to avoid further accusations in subjectivity. But I think Armenian sources also contain a lot of information, because many of Armenian intellectuals, many of Armenian representatives of Armenian elite were in very close relations with young Turks. We should remember that they were in very friendly mood with many of young Turkish mid-level, let's say, officials, and we can find a lot of information in Armenian sources too.
Thank you. We have one more question. It's you mentioned that the removal of the Armenian soldiers and officers from their combat roles in 1914. The question is then, that shows that this was well planned in advance. So how far in advance do you say that the genocide was planned, or at least this first step in the genocide?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's of course another big issue in Armenian genocide scholarship, and we are trying to find the very moment, and not we were exploring, we were attempting to find the very moment of decision making, but I don't think that there was one day then they said and just decided that we are going to end up with Armenians. I think it was a process. Of course, the first idea, the first notion about the first thought about the possibility of extermination of Armenians as a group was in Salonika meetings in 1910, 1911, when the young Turk committees meetings were organized in Salonika, and the first idea of possible homogenization of Ottoman Empire was stressed. The second, let's say, evidence of the possible solution of Armenian problem was at the end of 1914, December 1914 and January 1915. Then the secret meeting of 5 officials of Ottoman Empire, Talat, Behaeddin Shakir, Dr. Nazim, Ismail Jampolat, and Seifi was conducted, and they a list of requirements or advice, let's say, were created, and it is known as 10 Commandments of Armenian Genocide. And but I think that the very decision of the extermination, the race was adopted was made after Sarıkamış battle. After Sarıkamış battle, the existence of Armenians in Ottoman Empire was considered as dangerous, and they tried to wipe out the Armenian population of Western Armenia. After the defeat in Sarıkamış, then Russian offensive in these lands became very dangerous for the very existence of their power. And the law of deportation, which was adopted in late May, early June, or the law for redistribution of abandoned property, they were just something that would legitimize the extermination of Armenians, something that would to conceal the process. But I think we should search the date of the decision made from the December 1914 to the February 1915, somewhere there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manukyan. We appreciate a very good lecture on the mid-level perpetrators. We'll look forward to your November 12th lecture, which will talk about the ordinary killers of the Armenian Genocide. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. We'll see you hopefully next Thursday for a presentation on the cultural heritage that's being threatened in the area of Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you and good evening, everyone.